The inertia drop. The second gravity drops by exactly 50%, your own muscle memory becomes your deadliest enemy. You instantly weigh half as much, but your biological mass and your physical inertia remain exactly the same. Taking a normal, panicked step to run violently launches you straight up into the ceiling, resulting in millions of instant, catastrophic spinal injuries and shattered skulls right inside our own homes. People attempting to sprint or flee simply lose all foot traction, wildly flailing their arms in midair before crashing violently into brick walls. But the true horrifying carnage happens on the highways. Cars suddenly lose half of their physical friction with the asphalt. Going 70 miles per hour, the absolute slightest touch of the steering wheel sends heavy, multi-ton steel vehicles violently launching into the air, flipping uncontrollably over concrete barricades. Within the first 10 seconds of the drop, every major highway on planet Earth becomes a chaotic, inescapable meat grinder of flying steel, shattering glass, and complete vehicular slaughter.
The atmospheric suffocation. Gravity is the absolute only force physically holding our breathable air close to the Earth's surface. The exact moment it drops by half, the entire global atmosphere violently expands outward, escaping into the freezing vacuum of space. The breathable air pressure at sea level instantaneously drops to the equivalent of standing at the freezing peak of the Himalayas. You are suddenly gasping desperately for breath in your own living room, experiencing acute hypoxia and terrifying altitude sickness. Millions of people with asthma or weak hearts violently suffocate in a matter of agonizing minutes. Commercial airplanes currently flying at 30,000 feet are suddenly exposed to the near vacuum of space, leading to violent, catastrophic, explosive decompressions that rip the cabins completely apart. The comforting blue sky above you rapidly and aggressively darkens into a terrifying bruised purple as the thinning atmosphere entirely loses its ability to scatter the sun's light.
The Tectonic Awakening. For billions of years, the crushing, unfathomable weight of the Earth's crust has kept our violently shifting tectonic plates locked in a delicate, heavy balance. When half of that immense downward pressure is instantaneously removed, the entire crust of the planet violently rebounds upward in a terrifying release of pent-up kinetic energy. Fault lines that have been dormant for thousands of years are aggressively triggered all at once. Massive, apocalyptic earthquakes completely and violently shatter the deep foundations of every major city on the globe. Magma chambers buried deep beneath supervolcanoes, suddenly freed from billions of tons of suppressing rock, violently erupt, sending towering plumes of toxic black ash and boiling lava high into the expanding atmosphere. The ground itself turns into a chaotic, rolling ocean of cracked concrete and dirt, violently shaking human civilization completely apart from the inside out.
The Ocean Uprising. The massive, heavy oceans, no longer held tightly to the deep-sea floor, violently and aggressively rebel. Without the massive gravitational anchor keeping them down, the trillions of gallons of displaced water are aggressively pulled by the moon and the sudden tectonic shifts, creating mathematically impossible rogue waves. Tsunamis, hundreds of feet high, violently crash miles inland, instantly and aggressively wiping out major coastal megacities like New York, Tokyo, and London. But the water doesn't just hit and recede. Due to the lowered gravity, the crashing water violently splashes upward and stays suspended, turning the air itself into a suffocating, churning wall of heavy, floating ocean spray. Millions of people drown not in the deep ocean, but in the flooded, zero-visibility air of their own ruined streets, desperately trying to swim through chaotic water that completely refuses to settle back to the ground. The infrastructure rupture? Every single piece of modern human engineering, towering skyscrapers, massive suspension bridges, and thick concrete dams was mathematically designed to handle a very specific, constant gravitational downward load. They rely entirely on their own immense weight to remain anchored to their deep foundations. When 50% of that stabilizing weight vanishes in a split second, the structural tension completely snaps. Massive suspension bridges violently whip upward, aggressively snapping their thick steel cables and launching trapped cars into the freezing rivers below. Towering skyscrapers, suddenly structurally compromised and violently shaken by the massive earthquakes, aggressively shear apart at the steel seams. Massive hydroelectric dams, no longer heavy enough to hold back the violent sloshing reservoirs behind them, completely and violently fail, unleashing apocalyptic walls of water that utterly annihilate the valleys below.
The biological vertigo. The human body is entirely reliant on the constant, heavy downward pull of Earth's gravity to orient itself in three-dimensional space.
The sudden 50% reduction violently scrambles the delicate vestibular system deep inside your inner ear. Almost the entire global population is instantly struck by a terrifying, paralyzing wave of extreme vertigo and violent, uncontrollable nausea. You completely lose the ability to tell up from down. Survivors are utterly unable to stand, violently vomiting as their brains aggressively misfire, completely convinced they are endlessly falling through space. This mass biological panic renders humanity completely defenseless and unable to coordinate any rescue efforts whatsoever. You are trapped completely flat on the floor, violently clutching the carpet, absolutely terrified to move a single muscle as the world violently tears itself apart around you.
The supply chain paralysis. As the horrifying day drags on, the brutal reality of mass starvation and immediate thirst aggressively sets in. The global supply chain relies entirely on heavy friction and dead weight to function. Massive, heavy cargo ships are violently tossed onto dry land by the chaotic oceans. Massive freight trains aggressively derail as they become far too light to remain locked to the heavy steel tracks, violently spilling billions of tons of toxic chemicals and vital food supplies into the wilderness. Even if you manage to crawl to a shattered grocery store, you cannot effectively carry water or heavy canned goods. Trying to swing a loaded backpack over your shoulder aggressively throws your entire physical balance off, sending you violently tumbling into the shattered metal shelves. Humanity is completely paralyzed, entirely and permanently cut off from the massive logistical networks that kept our fragile civilization alive.
The devastating return comes at the absolute end of the 24 hours, when the 50% reduction suddenly ends and normal gravity violently and aggressively snaps back to exactly 100%. Everything that was temporarily suspended in the air, millions of tons of ocean water, massive sheets of shattered glass, derailed cars, and broken concrete blocks, violently and aggressively slam straight back down to the earth with terrifying, crushing kinetic force. Buildings that miraculously barely survived the initial drop are instantly and violently crushed into geometric dust by their own suddenly returned weight. Anyone caught outside is aggressively pulverized by falling debris that they thought was floating safely above them. The devastating return proves that the true disaster wasn't just the temporary loss of gravity, but the horrifying, inescapable, crushing reality of the world aggressively resetting to its brutal physical equilibrium.